Disclaimer. The content presented in this program is entirely satire, and the mainstream media always tells the truth. COVID was true, and you should be vegan, and everything James Devon Johnson says isn't real, and James has not achieved any real-world success and is very financially poor. Do not use these words against him in court because the entire show is satire, and he really loves President Biden and feminists. James thinks that federal agents are very respectable people who are not fat nerds. Please do not take this program seriously and get your booster injections as soon as possible. All right. We are live on TikTok. StreamYard's recording. So Josh, how do you pronounce your last name?
Seiter, just like apple cider.
Seiter, Josh Seiter. Thank you for coming on the JD show. So you are a trans activist and social media influencer, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I don't give myself the appellations or titles, but people have called me those things. But yeah, I'm just a person.
Okay. And why don't you go ahead and give me and the audience a little bit more about your background? I'm sure, the way you were raised was a lot different to the way you live your life now. So maybe just give a little brief summary of your life story.
Sure. So I grew up in a small town in Illinois called Champaign-Urbana. It's a college town. I was homeschooled my whole life by born-again Christian parents. I stayed in that my entire life until I went to college at the University of Illinois. After undergrad, I went to Chicago and matriculated in law school, where I earned a Juris Doctor degree. After that, during law school, I began stripping to earn money because all the internships and clerkships were unpaid. And while stripping, I got noticed by a couple TV shows. One was Escape Club on the E! Network, one was The Bachelorette on ABC. And shortly after that, I started doing social media and started growing a following. And over the last 6 or 7 years, that following has grown to where we're at now, where my page is getting millions and millions of views and tens and thousands of comments under all the posts. So it was kind of a long progression to get where we're at.
Okay, understood. So college time frame is when you decided to go through this transition period, or
That's not when I transitioned. I'm 37 years old. So college for me began 20 years ago at the age of 17. I attended a little early, but college was where my eyes were kind of opened and where I came out from under my parents' guise and just the way they kind of ran the house, and was able to see things for my own and have my own independence. Like most people who go to college, it was a time of enlightenment and thinking for myself, where I had a little more agency and autonomy to not just have borrowed thoughts from other people, but to have my own thoughts. And the more I started to think about myself and my identity, I realized that how I had felt that I was different my whole life, I could best explain it by the fact that I had these issues with my gender identity. And it was only recently, in the last 4 months, that I came out as trans.
okay. And so I'm kind of curious because for me personally, I don't necessarily believe in the whole transgender ideology, but I do find it fascinating to talk about. I know a lot of the people who watch the show like to see the different guests come on and talk about their own personal views. So by no means whatsoever should you feel judged by me. I'm just interested to hear your own personal perspectives on things. So I think for me, like looking at you, you almost seem like a masculine dude, dressed masculine, like you have, masculine facial features, but you slapped on some makeup, threw on some earrings. So it makes me kind of question, is this like a role play for social media, or are you completely serious about this?
Yeah, I would describe my look as a little more, at least today in a professional setting, having an interview, I typically present what some would call more androgynous. So it doesn't fall into the binary of masculine or feminine. But I understand where you're coming from, that to you it looks more masculine or manly. There are cis women that wear suit jackets and blazers and look like they also just slapped on makeup on top of their male outfit. So I think that term could apply to a lot of people, not just me. But even if that were the case, I don't think that there's anything wrong with me presenting more masculine. Your point was that it looks like I'm just role playing or something. I get that a lot. you're a fake transgender, but I'm real transgender. You're a fraud, but I'm really trans. I get that a lot from people in the LGBTQ community. We're all biological males, trans women are, that were born biologically male that now identify as women. The distinction between me and any other trans woman is non-existent. We're biological males that now identify as female. WPATH, who, in all the guidelines and scientific literature, make it clear that trans women are all valid in their journeys, no matter how unique, different, and diverse they are. You don't have to transition to be trans. You don't have to be on hormone therapy to be trans. You don't have to have gender dysphoria to be trans. Some people may have those things and go through those things. Other trans women may not. So just following the science and deferring to the medical community, I think it's a fallacious and specious argument to try to distinguish me and separate me from anybody else simply because I present a little more masculine. We're all biological males that were assigned male at birth that identify as female now, and that's our gender identity, which is distinct and divorced from our biological sex. So
Mhm.
I would challenge you and any other trans woman out there, anybody else in the LGBTQ community, challenge you, prove to me that I am not trans and explain to me how I'm not trans. And I want you to quote the medical literature when you do it.
Okay, so it sounds like you almost have a different perspective of the whole trans idea that I feel like a lot of other people who identify as trans are not in the same, I guess, thought process that you are. So, do you identify as a woman now?
Yes, so I'm a trans woman. And can you break that down, elucidate that a little bit and articulate it to me
So
so I
you're saying that you consider yourself a biological male, but you are now a trans woman. So is there a difference for you between a trans woman and a biological woman?
Well, no, it's not that I consider myself a biological woman, a biological man. The science, and everybody agrees, there's no disagreement on this. Trans women are biological males that were assigned male at birth, but we identify now as female. There's no disagreement on that. We are
Mhm.
biological males. That's not me saying that. That's the scientific community and everybody saying that.
Right, so I understand that portion. So I think, a big argument from the trans community that we see happening on the internet today is, identifying trans, women like to argue that they are in fact real women, and I think when people hear the words "real women," they think of a biological woman, so I'm curious as to what your perspective is on
Yeah,
that.
and going back to that, that was your last point that I didn't answer. I think it was, do I see a difference between cis women and trans women? Of course, there's a difference. Cis women they're called cis because definitionally, if you look at the definition of it, they literally identify in congruence with the sex that they were born, with their biology. Trans women, by definition, we identify as the opposite. That's what makes us not cis and what makes us trans. So, just by definition, yes, there's a total difference between trans women and cis or biological women. And I don't think any rational person would argue that, but you do see some arguments on the internet saying trans women are exactly the same or there's no distinction between them. Just by their definitions, trans women are different than biological and cis women. So I don't really
Mhm.
understand that argument that they're the same.
Okay, so it sounds like this is something that you probably butt heads with other members in the LGBT community. Are you like labeled by them as a Republican out of curiosity?
Yeah, so that's a great question. My beliefs are libertarian, and I don't
Mhm.
subscribe to woke ideology or leftist ideology. I never have, except maybe a couple years in college. And I think it's because my ideological beliefs are different than not all, but many people in the LGBTQ community and the trans community that they throw a lot of shade at me because they can't debate anything I'm saying. They just dislike the fact that my ideological beliefs aren't identical to theirs. And so I think that is a big reason why I'm hated on, is because I tend to hold libertarian beliefs, which sometimes rightly and sometimes, oftentimes not rightly, are conflated with conservative or traditional beliefs. I'm not a conservative. I do have some views that may be considered traditional, but I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm not a rightist. I'm not a MAGA. I'm a libertarian. And
Mhm.
because in my opinion, the left often holds views that impinge on our freedoms and liberties. And being a libertarian, I often disagree with the left and I call out the left. And I think my community doesn't like that. Yes.
Interesting. Now, I think you're the first person that I've met within your community who kind of holds this ideology that you do. Have you met others who are like minded, or is that rare and far in between?
I have. There's a few people, few popular YouTubers that are trans women that are, I'd say they're conservative. So they're to the right of me because I'm libertarian. I'm somewhere in the middle on almost all the issues. There's I mean, you think of Caitlyn Jenner immediately comes to mind. I think she's very far right. And so I'm not the first, but I think right now I'm maybe the most vocal or the one most people are talking about. But there's many trans women that hold libertarian beliefs or beliefs that aren't in line with the left. But the left loves to marginalize those voices. The left loves to silence those voices, and the left loves to erase those voices. So you're not going to know about them or hear about them because if you don't fall in line with the official narrative, then you're going to get silenced or they're going to try to. So I think we are underrepresented, those of us that don't fall in line with the left or the woke ideology, and they try their best to suppress us, but like with me, it doesn't always work.
Okay. Now, so many questions here, but I'm just gonna get into it one one thing at a time. And how do you feel about trans women playing in women's sports?
I think that's a very nuanced issue. I was just on another podcast and gave the same answer because it's a popular question that's so nuanced. There's not a league, an independent league, just for trans women or for trans men. In lieu of that, or because of that, there's somewhere where we have to belong. Where that is unclear. There are muscular differences between trans women and cis women. There's biological differences, there's skeletal differences, there's hormonal differences. So that's tough. Whether, like a Leah Thomas issue, should Leah Thomas be competing with biological women? It's very tough because it's not fair to tell Leah Thomas or any of us you can't compete. But at the same time, is it fair to have us competing with biological men? Is that fair? I don't claim to know the issue, and I'll say outright, or I don't claim to know the answer, and I'll say that outright. I don't know the answer to this. It's so nuanced. I would like to see trans women like me be given our own league so that we're all on the same playing field. But until that happens, it's going to be very hard to know or predict where we fit in best. And so you're seeing kind of that made manifest when it comes to Leah Thomas and boxers and other people that are competing with biological women, and there's issues that are coming up because it's such a nuanced issue.
Right. I think the biggest argument is like biological men, like you said, naturally have different muscle structure. Like men in general are going to be bigger and stronger. And so when you throw a biological male, even if they identify as a woman, they're still going to have the physical edge in whatever competitive sport it is.
Yeah, and that's obviously the main thrust and the main point that the right likes to point out is, hey, look, there's still these very elementary basic differences between trans women. Even if we're on hormones, there's still structural differences between us, even if our hormonal levels have changed. But again, I
Mhm.
just want to point out the scientific literature makes it clear that trans women don't have to be on hormones to be trans, and we don't have to transition and we don't need to have surgery, and we are still trans. All of the
Right.
literature makes that clear. So that brings up another issue. What if we're not transitioning and we're not on hormones and we go and we play against biological women? How is that going to turn out? I think we need our own league, given the broad brushstrokes the medical community has given when it comes to trans women and who qualifies as a trans woman.
Right. Yeah, I actually think like part of the big reason this is such a huge debatable topic is the leftist woke ideology is trying to push the idea that trans women are in fact real women and should be treated the same and it should just be completely blended in. But then you have more of the conservative crowd arguing against that for obvious reasons. So for you, like how are you able to like get your point across trying to separate the two without pissing off either side?
Yeah, it's impossible. So I don't try. Everyone, it's always split 50-50. There's
Mhm.
always conservatives and people that look like uh, appear to be identifying as Trump supporters bashing me and lambasting me on my social media. And then there's people that say they're part of my community, the LGBTQIA community, and they're bashing me. It doesn't matter how fine of a line I try to walk. I will always be infuriating half of the population, half of the
Mhm.
LGBTQ community, half of the right community. So I don't even try. My beliefs don't fall into boxes. I know the left loves labels. They love putting people in perfect little boxes. They like everybody to fall in line and they like to capitalize on our identities. And the left loves to play identity politics and constantly talk about us like we're a monolith and we all act the exact same and hold the exact same beliefs. And the reality is we don't. And there's many
Mhm.
people like me who to them are enigmas because we are just ourselves and we're individuals and we hold our own beliefs and we don't fall into that box, and that seems to upset a lot of the people on the left. So I think that's why I'm kind of causing an uproar, because people don't know how to understand me because they think that I'm going to hold certain beliefs and I don't all the time.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, and I've never had a conversation with anybody, in your position, so this is actually really enlightening for me because I feel like that is something that I could get behind and support. My biggest problem has been I would not accept a trans man like as an actual biological woman. And there's a lot of debate online, like, oh, even if you come across a trans man on Tinder, for example, and you're swiping no because you're not into that, they say like, oh, it's same thing as a woman, like just because they have a dick. Like I've had on this guy's name's Jack like Jess on social media. He's infamously famous for dating trans women.
Okay.
And even in his own mind, he thinks that a trans woman is a biological woman. They just have a dick. And he completely acknowledges that. And that's his own perspective, which I feel like definitely aligns more with the traditional LGBTQ movement.
Yeah, and again, I would just point people within my own community and on the left to the science and the medical community, which says explicitly that trans women are women that were born biological males. And what makes us trans is that our identifying as women is incongruent and different from our sex at birth. So,
Mhm.
by definition, we are not cis women. We are trans women, and that's what makes us trans, is that we are born biological males and we transitioned, whether physically, but you don't have to, the science says, or mentally, we transitioned to women in our gender identity. And that's what makes us trans. And we should celebrate it and be proud of it and say, we're different than cis women. We're still beautiful. We're still amazing. And if people like trans women and want to date them, great. But why engage in this erroneous and fallacious argument that trans women are identical to cis women or biological women? I don't understand it. It's patently false. It flies in the face of the science, and we know it's not true. Trans women are trans women, and biological women are biological women.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, would you say because of the way you view this issue, would you say that actually separates you from the LGBT movement, since that movement in general does not agree with your position?
I would say the LGBTQ community has become more myopic and more narrow minded over the last few decades, and they have separated themselves from many of us and become less inclusive and less tolerant. And because of that, we've been forced to be separated from the movement. We haven't separated ourselves from it. They've just become increasingly intolerant, increasingly bigoted, and increasingly discriminatory towards anybody that doesn't fit into the tidy little boxes they want. And
Mhm.
ironically, whenever we do practice individuality or expressing our own unique, beautiful selves, they seem to get upset by it if it doesn't fall in line. So I would say they have forced the balkanization and the separation of many of us from the community, and I think that's egregious. I think it's regrettable, and I think it's sad because there's many of us that would love to be part of the community, but we're being ostracized.
Right. Are you familiar with the bottom G?
I am not.
So the bottom G, Brian Kemp, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. He's a well-known figure online. He looks like Andrew Tate. So when he throws on sunglasses and a suit blazer, he looks very similar to Andrew Tate, but he's known online for looking the part. But he does these super zesty dance moves, and it's hilarious. So anyway, I interviewed him on this podcast, and so he's a biological dude. He's gay though, so he just likes men, and he lives in Thailand right now. So he's telling me about the concept over there of lady boys. How
Right.
essentially those are trans women, so biological men who try to dress up like women, but they still have their package. They're still biological dudes, right? But they don't recognize the Western ideology of the trans movement. They simply refer to them as ladyboys. So they're not a dude, they're not a woman, they're ladyboys.
I would say that is a more progressive and enlightened appellation or term that you could use for people like that. It shows that they're dealing in reality, it shows that they're dealing in science, and it shows that they're listening to the medical community and saying our gender identity is feminine and female, lady, but biologically our sex is boy, and what we were assigned at birth is boy, and then you get the compound ladyboy. So that is seems like a very rational, factual title to give somebody. And I think that's a progressive way of viewing it. I don't know if I would want to be called a ladyboy or if anyone else would, but I don't find anything wrong with that. It's dealing in reality.
Yeah, interesting perspective. So I feel like again, I would have to kind of almost separate you from labeling you as part of the LGBT movement, just because your ideological perspective is completely different, right? But one of the biggest arguments on the right side of the political spectrum, conservatives are making, is there are so many mental health related issues when it comes to most trans women. What are your perspectives on that?
Yeah, so those trans women that do have gender dysphoria, I don't, but some trans women do, uh, and that my understanding is in the DSMI, the diagnostic diagnostic statistical manual, and is a diagnosed mental illness. But I'm not a doctor, I'm not a biologist, so I don't want to speak above my pay grade on this. But gender dysphoria is a real thing. It's people that are in distress over their gender identity. And I think it's important that those people get help, get therapy, and have someone that can talk with them and talk through those things with them. And I would hope that they're not being more confused or being told things that confuse them or confuse the issues they're dealing with even more.
Mhm.
Again, not everyone who's trans has gender dysphoria. WPATH, WHO, and the NIH make it very clear that not all trans women have gender dysphoria. But those who do should be treated for it. When someone has anorexia, we don't tell them, yes, you are fat and you should keep losing weight until you become more of a skeleton. We say, you have a mental illness and you need to be treated for it. What you are seeing and thinking is not dealing in reality and is not true. You, in fact, are not fat, you're skinny, and you shouldn't go down this path. In other words, doctors help those people. When a schizophrenic person says the CIA is hiding in my bushes and tapping my phone and they're after me, our medical community does not go, yes, you're correct. If you think that, it's valid. There are CIA agents hiding in your bushes and tapping your phone. They say, no, you're wrong, you're mentally ill, and you're not dealing in reality. I think when some people say, I think that I feel like this thing, doesn't have to be trans, it could be anything. There's people that identify as handicapped, and they're not. There's a whole community of these people. Doctors don't tell those people, yes, you're right, you should be blind, and we're going to help you cut your eyes out. That's wrong. So I think when there's people that are in distress and they're confused and they're suffering with a real mental illness, they should be treated for it instead of having those delusions encouraged. Now, I don't deal with gender dysphoria, so again, I don't want to speak too much on it. But I think if someone's going through a dysphoric episode, they need to get help for it.
So how did you rule out you don't have gender dysphoria?
Well, I've never been diagnosed with it. I guess I can't say that I've dispositively ruled out gender dysphoria. I've just never
Mhm.
been diagnosed with it. And the scientific literature and the medical community makes it clear that you do not need a diagnosis of gender dysphoria to be a valid trans woman or
R-
trans man for that matter.
Right. So if someone doesn't have gender dysphoria, then what would make them like, want to be trans?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I just feel more, for me personally, I'll just speak about me. I just feel more comfortable as a woman, and I feel like who I am aligns most with the female gender. Now, this is a very nuanced issue, which is why we also have non binary and gender fluidity, because not everybody fits into these
But
two
before we
binaries.
continue, would you mind explaining those terms for the people watching and myself?
Yeah, so gender fluid people say, I don't fit into male or female, those two binaries or dualities perfectly. I'm somewhere in between. Non binary people are very similar. It's very similar to gender fluid and say, I'm not necessarily always female or always male. I don't really say that I fall into one or the other. I'm somewhere around it or somewhere near it, but it can't be categorized. And you can actually be trans, gender fluid, and non binary all at the same time. The scientific literature in the medical community make that clear. So, going back to your original question, why I'm trans, even if I don't have gender dysphoria, because I feel like I don't fit into that male gender box perfectly. And so I identify as trans because I feel more female, but I could also be non binary and gender fluid. WPATH, who in the NIH make it clear that that's a personal decision from each person that they can make on their own. So if I end up deciding that I am also gender fluid and non binary, which I've given this a lot of thought, that could be valid and coexist with me being trans also. But for now, I just identify as trans and it's valid.
Okay, understood. So, in my personal opinion, I believe it goes against nature for a biological human being to want to transition into the opposite sex. So, in your opinion, do you think that it is a natural process? If so, why is it so rare among society in general? Or do you think there are outside factors that influence a person's decision to eventually want to transition?
I think when you say it goes against nature, that's such a loaded, subjective thing coming from nurture and nature in the way you were raised, in your worldview, which may be erroneous and may be myopic. It's the same argument that we heard a lot in the 90s when it came to homosexual behavior. It goes against nature. Well, most people now would agree that's not the case. And I actually have multiple family members who are gay, and I can tell you after spending 37 years with them, it doesn't go against nature. It's in their nature, and they were born that way. So I think that's just a very loaded way of asking it, or I would even say a short sighted way by saying, I think it goes against nature. You can say it goes against your view of the world and what you think is the natural order or how things should be. But that's so subjective. I could say, I think your lifestyle goes against nature. I could say, I think you're totally limiting yourself and putting yourself in the binary of male gender and putting yourself in a box that you don't have to, and you really just need to loosen up and start living life and try different things. So even though I disagree with your question, I'll still go ahead and answer it. I don't think it goes against nature, although we are a small minority, as you pointed out. It's still present, and there's many of us, just like there's many gay people. And there will always be people that say, oh, I think your lifestyle goes against nature. Oh, I think your lifestyle goes against God. I'm a libertarian. I think those people need to kick rocks. And I'm a true believer, as Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., one of the progenitors of libertarianism, said, we all have a right to throw our arm as far as it can reach, so long as it doesn't touch the man next to us.
Mhm.
Or we're allowed to say anything we want except yelling fire in a crowded theater, because that then affects other people and impinges on their liberty. So, as long as what I'm doing isn't impinging on your liberty, I don't think you should have an opinion on it, or anybody. And when I say you, I mean anyone out there. I think we should all live and let live, so long as it's not affecting us. Where it does affect us, and what many people get upset about, is when children come into play. And I'm sure you'll have a question about that later.
Yeah, so actually, to reword the term that I use, going against nature, let's reword it in this way. Um, I believe that it is an action that is influenced. So like throughout history of time, we've seen like the Greeks were infamous for
Yeah.
having homosexual sex while they're traveling across waters, and even after pillaging a village, like they go at it. So in history, we've had trans people, we've had homosexuality, but rather than it being a natural instinct, there's a lot of um, sociologists, psychologists, um, historians who have like come together, try to point out some of these issues, figure out solutions. And there is a big argument that for somebody wanting to be trans, it is an influence decision rather than a naturally made one from birth.
Well, I think that just falls into the broader umbrella of nature versus nurture, which has been argued for a very long time, at least as long as I've been alive, which is exactly that. How much of what we do is influenced by the things around us, and how much of it is just our inherent intrinsic nature? So I think that's with anything, not just trans or being homosexual, but anything we do. Being straight is influenced by your environment. Maybe people picked up dolls and wanted to play with them and had a predilection to being gay, but their parents kept forcing them to not do those things. And instead of the boy picking up a doll, they put a fire truck in their hand. You're
Mhm.
then interfering with that child's nature and their predilection towards being drawn to these things. And so I think anything we do is going to have inherent in it a nature versus nurture argument. I don't think anyone is credible who claims that being gay is somehow uh, due to being influenced or whatever. I have so many gay friends and know so many gay people, and I can tell you that without fail, all of them are that way, not because they were forced to or because of their social milieu or the surrounding around them. It's how they were born. They were born gay, and that's fine and that's fantastic. With trans people, going to your latter point, how much of that is influenced by culture? If you look at other countries where it's more acceptable, it's more prevalent and it's more ubiquitous. So that would suggest that our environment in the social milieu plays a part in whether people feel comfortable enough to be trans. I don't know how much of someone deciding to be trans is nature and how much is nurture and how much they're affected by the culture around them. But surely, where it's outlawed in certain places, like in certain Muslim countries, you don't see a lot of trans people. Well, it's not acceptable there. So that tells you that the surrounding culture matters. And so I think that's, again, a very nuanced thing about nature versus nurture that you bring up. And I can't say how much of me being a trans woman has to do with my surroundings and things like that, and how much had to do with just how I was born. Was I born this way? I don't know. We need people way above my pay grade to answer that question.
Right. I think that's part of the argument on one side is I haven't seen the studies myself, but I have seen people who, research the studies who have argued on social media with this topic in mind, saying that when it comes to the homosexual population as well as the trans population, usually those people, like the majority of the time, had some type of influence with that ideology from the time they were children.
I would stridently disagree with that. I don't think there's any evidence of that. In fact, I think there are a lot of people born gay because you're born gay or you're born straight. We didn't pick whether we were going to be gay or straight. You didn't decide, I'm attracted to men and women, but I'm just going to choose women. You were born hetero, and that's fine. And other people were born gay. But I can tell you that instead of most of them being influenced to be homosexual, most of the homosexuals I know were constantly influenced and forced to be straight. And it was only when they could get out of that and were allowed to actually be themselves that they could be the gay people they were born to be. So I think that is a terribly unsupported argument that gay people somehow have trauma, or you can in their past that explains it, or if you look, maybe they took hard drugs sometime and that turned them gay.
Well, in the most simplistic way to say is the idea was introduced to them, whether it's like through their parents, through school. I think that's where
The
that side of the
idea was
argument's coming
introduced to
from.
be hetero to them tens of thousands of times throughout their life, and they still ended up being gay because they were born gay. It's not because one time they saw something gay or the concept was introduced to them. They were beat over the head with heteronormative things throughout their entire life, and they still turned out gay because they're gay, not because one time something gay was suggested to them. That is ridiculous. And I hope nobody subscribes to that. I can understand if Andrew Tate's stunted followers think that's the case, but that's not reality. And that's not how things work if you have even a handful of gay friends. You know, they were beat over the head to be hetero their entire lives. So I think that's ridiculous that something was suggested to them that turned them gay. Trust me, I have close friends who believe this nonsense, and it's nothing but drivel.
Friends who are trans women too, or
No, these are cis, straight, hetero friends that are
oh,
trying
okay,
to convince me that my gay friends must have had some kind of influence or seminal moment that turned them gay. And that is utter nonsense. You're either born gay or you're born straight. It's nothing more, nothing less. Our surroundings can affect us, and we see that a lot. The term staying in the closet was developed because people were forced to stay in the closet their whole life, and they were beat over the head with heteronormative rules constantly. And it was only when they could get out from under that that they could actually be their true gay or bi or whatever self. So I just don't think that argument holds much water.
interesting. What is your perspective on introducing trans ideology to children?
Yeah, so I think that's where a lot of people get upset is our right to live our lives as trans women should be unimpeded. Everyone should be able to live whatever life they want. If someone wants to be a Christian, I think it's ridiculous. But go ahead, you can believe in whatever you want. If someone wants to be Muslim, I think that's ridiculous. But if you want to follow that religion, go ahead, as long as it doesn't affect me. As a trans woman, I don't like to see kids drawn into religion, and I don't like to see them indoctrinated, and I don't like to see them brainwashed by anything. I think we need to let them be kids. And that holds for gender identity. I don't think we need to be confusing young children, let's say from ages 4 to 13, with things that frankly they don't understand, and it's just going to confuse them more. They're not even thinking about it. I can tell you that from experience. And confuse them by introducing things to them, like there's lots of schools with books about, gay or gay sex or trans, or I just saw a cartoon for 4-year-olds on Disney, and it was a giraffe telling one of the other characters, I don't feel like a boy or a girl, and that's okay. I'm non-binary and I may be trans. Why are we playing that for 4, 5, 6-year-olds? And that just needs to be taken away. Let kids be kids. As far as hormone blockers and putting kids on hormones or helping them transition without parents' consent sometimes, why are we allowing kids to make decisions that have colossal consequences for themselves down the road at an age like that? If we can't make big decisions until we're 18 or in some cases 21, why are we allowing people to have mastectomies or transition at very young ages? Their hypothalamus doesn't even fully develop until the age of 25. Why would we pump them with hormones or let them take away their breasts if they're 12 years old? That doesn't make sense. I do believe there are some extreme cases where, unlike me, a child was 10 years old having severe gender dysphoria and felt suicidal and wanted to kill themselves unless they could transition. There are extreme cases like that. We need to give them mental health help instead of pumping them with hormones and having them transition. I think mental health help is so underrated. And as someone who has spent the last 8 years raising awareness for mental health, talking publicly about mental health, and blogging about mental health, and explaining the benefits of cognitive behavioral therapy, I think it's very important, and it's often left out of the conversation, that we just provide mental health help to people that are struggling. The answer is not always take this drastic decision. So if someone's 18 or older, or let's say 21 years or older, I think then they can start taking concrete steps towards affirming their gender identity. But under that is not okay. Teaching it in schools is not okay. And I don't know why we have shows and cartoons that are confusing my nieces and nephew with things that they're not even thinking about. I can promise you, when they're watching cartoons, they don't know what the hell they're talking about when the giraffe starts talking about being non-binary and being confused about his gender identity. I don't want my nieces and
Mhm.
nephew watching that.
Right, definitely. So when it comes for your own personal preferences, just out of curiosity, do you date men? Do you date women?
I'm almost exclusively attracted to women only.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I just wanted to ask that before some follow-up questions.
Sure.
But you've spoken on the mental health aspect of transitioning. So how is one to determine, like, for example, like who's to say that you don't need mental health help versus a different trans person who has the opposite ideology of you, who thinks they are a real woman? Like, how do you determine who needs mental health help and who doesn't?
We all do. I've been seeing a therapist for 22 years. I talk to a therapist twice a week. I'm always taking care of my mental health. So the answer is we all need mental health help. We all need to prioritize our mental health. And anyone claiming that they don't need to, especially if they're struggling with gender dysphoria, which is common in my community, then they're lying to themselves. We all need to prioritize our mental health. And I think the government needs to dedicate more resources to this. So maybe there's some people out there that don't need any mental health help, and that's fantastic. But I think many of us do, and it's okay to admit it, and it's okay to get it. And I'm always putting my mental health first.
And what does mental health help look like for someone who's trying to transition? Because you're going to have one therapist who's going to say, "Oh no, you have gender dysphoria. You're not actually a woman. Like you need to start thinking this way." And then you're going to have a different therapist who's going to believe in the ideology, be like, "Oh yes, no, of course," and then just reassure the person. So, what is real mental health help looking like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can't speak on the field of psychiatry and psychology as it intersects with gender identity because when I talk to my therapist, it's not exclusively or even mostly about that. It's about other issues I'm dealing with, anxiety, things like that. But I can picture this where someone goes in to get help with their gender identity, which they're struggling with, and they're lied to. And the medical community lies to them and indulges false beliefs. And that's not healthy because, as we said earlier, we wouldn't indulge a schizophrenic person, we wouldn't indulge an anorexic person in their erroneous beliefs. And so, if we hold a false belief and a medical professional indulges it and tells us to take action because of it, I think that's egregious and I think it's disgusting. I think if someone is truly struggling with their gender identity, they need someone to speak frankly and factually to them. And I think it's unfortunate, and I think your question is hinting at this, that so many medical professionals give them false information and false hope and tell them, well, if I were to go in, I understand I'm a trans woman, which means I transitioned from the gender I was assigned at birth. And if a psychologist or therapist told me, Josh, you are a woman, you're a biological woman, or you're the exact same, I would say you're ignorant. I am not the exact same. There are differences and distinctions, and that's okay. Trans women are different, they're distinct, but they're not deficient, and
Mhm.
we're different, but we're equally valid and we're equally worthy. We're just different. And anyone who denies that difference is subscribing to an ideology or a religion that's false. And I think they need to get educated because that's not all right. And you're just harming people at that point. So I really hope that we can rely on the medical community to be rational and to stick to the scientific facts. And our own literature tells us that trans women are different than biological women, and that's okay.
Understood. What is your perspective on transition surgeries?
I think, again, being a libertarian, we get one life to live. We should be able to do whatever we want so long as it doesn't impinge or curtail someone else's ability to be a libertarian and to live and enjoy life. And so if I want to go get surgery and get top surgery, I think I should be allowed to. I'm not saying that it needs to be available to me. I can't force it to be available. Look, I'd love to be rich, but I can't force a Lamborghini to appear in front of me. But I think if it's available, I should be allowed to take advantage of it and do it, just like a bodybuilder. If a bodybuilder wants to take steroids so that he can lift heavy weights, I'm a libertarian. Let him take steroids, lift heavy weights, live his life, live his purpose, and be happy. So I think whoever wants to get surgery, that's great. Is it an outgrowth of an insecurity? Is it indicative of them having severe insecurity? Maybe, But if they're an adult and they want to make that decision, that's fine. For me, I don't need surgery. I don't want to get surgery because I think I look great. I think I look beautiful and I don't think I need it. I like how I look. But for those who want to, I think they should be free to, as long as they're 18 years or older.
Okay. And what are your positions on the nuclear family structure?
Yeah, great question. So, one of the things that makes it very hard to live a free life and to have freedoms and liberties is violent crime. So, I live in Chicago, and people are being violently mugged and carjacked and murdered all the time. People are constantly gun violence over the weekend. 55 people get killed on the weekend. That's normal here. And so it's really digressing here, and it really affects our ability to live. You know, if someone wants to go for a drive on the Gold Coast here in Chicago and go shopping, they might get carjacked and beat while they're doing it. And part of the reason that happens, and we have so much crime, is because the nuclear family has dissolved in the majority of kids in certain groups are being raised without fathers. And there have multiple siblings who are being raised without fathers, and they're living in abject poverty, and then predictably they're turning to crime, because that's what happens when you have a single mother trying to raise 5 kids. Is she can't do it, and then the kids turn to crime. And then you see things like what's going on in Chicago happen. Totally predictable. And so I really don't like that, because that's anathema to libertarianism, into freedom, into being able to just move about safely in this country. And so I think, unlike BLM, what they say, we do need a strong nuclear family. We do need two-parent homes. It's not a panacea. It's not a cure-all. It's not a guarantee that the kids are going to turn out great, but having single parent homes is demonstrably more indicative and more likely to lead to things like crime or the kids turning to drugs or what have you. So I grew up in a two-parent home, and I wish everyone could. But it's interesting that the media never talks about this. They never talk about two-parent homes. They never talk about the importance of it. They seem to constantly downplay the ravages of violent crime and who's committing the violent crime in our inner cities. So I really think we do need to have a talk about culture, because there's been a digression of culture. Culture has regressed, and part of that is because there's not a lot of two-parent homes anymore. And that creates a vacuum, which then leads to crime. And there's a good book that touches on this called Freakonomics, which you may have read. It was popular when I was younger. I read it in college,
Mhm.
but Freakonomics touches on this issue.
Yeah, I've listened to some of the audiobook. Not much of an actual reader myself, but audiobooks, hey, all day. So they say the key component to a strong nuclear family is going to be a strong masculine role model and leader within the nuclear family. So I'm curious as to what your opinions are on traditional masculinity.
Yeah, so I think it's fine for to have traditionally masculine father. It's a double-edged sword. I think there can be drawbacks. I see fathers that are very hard on their kids when it comes to sports, when the kids are 8, 9, 10 years old. I went through that myself. I had a traditionally very masculine father. Um, it caused a lot of heartache because he was very hard on us and a lot of things. But we all turned out fantastic. We all went to college. 2 of us got postgraduate degrees. We all turned out pretty good, pretty successful. And a lot of it is due to the domineering father that we had. But he didn't have to be as domineering or as masculine as he always was. If I picked up a doll, that would not have been okay. He talked openly about what that he didn't like homosexuality and things like that. I don't think there's any benefit to that. So I think you can benefit from having a strong father figure in your life, but whether they need to exude masculinity all the time or whether that's always healthy, I think that's an overgeneralization. You have to take it on a case by case basis. Sometimes it may be beneficial to have a very masculine father figure or patriarchal father figure. Other times it may be counterproductive. So I think it's really on a case by case basis, and I would urge you not to overgeneralize and say it's always good to have a masculine father figure. Well, not all the time, but generally, is it good to have a present father in a child's life and a present mother in a child's life? Of course it is. The only people who would disagree is BLM, the woke mob, and the far left. They're the only ones who don't think that, but it's common sense.
And is it possible for a trans woman to be traditionally masculine?
I I think trans women can present masculine. Obviously, today I'm presenting more masculine. All of us were trans women. All of us were assigned male at birth and are biologically males, but our gender identity is female. That's what makes us trans. And so, with that, this very nuanced issue, we're going to have masculine traits mixed in with female traits. Not all of us, but some of us. And I think a lot of the reason why I get so much hate is because I have preserved some of my masculine traits. I don't fit into one box, which is why we discussed the non binary and gender fluid as well. And the far left and the woke culture loves this because they have made it clear we don't always fit into one of the binaries. And so it would be natural that I would present both masculine and feminine. And it only makes sense following the science that we're going to have some masculine traits and some feminine traits. And so I don't think there's anything weird about that. I don't think there's anything wrong about it. And I think it's probably actually quite common.
Interesting perspective. Well, Josh, we are getting close to the end of this segment here. So I want to, kind of give you a chance to do a little recap and ask you this final question. And that final question is going to be, how do we settle the trans argument? Because right now, as you're well aware, we see the left side of the political spectrum arguing for something you don't necessarily believe in. And then we have the right side of the political spectrum counter arguing something you also don't believe in. So, what is the solution?
So the media and social media like to elevate the extreme voices on both sides because that's what gets clicks and that's what gets views. What we need to bring back is rational debate, open conversation, civic discourse, and civil debate. That is how we get answers. That is how we have a discussion. And that's what we need to do to make progress. But we can't do that so long as the media is elevating extreme voices in both camp, and so long as the left and the woke mob is refusing to allow people to talk who don't fit their narrative and is constantly censoring people and constantly shutting down people who are saying things they don't like. We need to bring back the ability to agree to disagree. We need to bring back open dialogue. We need to stop calling everybody a bigot or a racist who disagrees with us. And we need to just start having rational conversations. That's how we make progress within the trans movement and within the broader society. And that's the only way we're going to find solutions. But until that's done, it's not going to happen. You're just going to keep having the media and social media elevating the extreme voices. You're going to keep having the left trying to censor people who don't agree with them and scream at them and hurl ad hominem insults at them. And so long as that's going on, we're not going to make any progress. So if no progress has been made lately, which I don't think it has, we can blame the media and we can blame the left for that.
Yeah, no, good answer. I feel like there's not much room for me to disagree with you. Obviously, we don't agree on every single aspect, but I think overall you bring in a very new and enlightening point for me, and I'm sure the people who are watching are also going to feel the same way. I really didn't know that there were people like yourself who have the same opinions and ideas as you do. So, as a more traditionally conservative guy myself, I don't like to label myself as a Republican because I'm not about the party whatsoever, but overall, relatively conservative. And I do feel like a lot of your perspective is a good middle ground, and
Yeah,
I could be on board with it.
and because of that, it doesn't get elevated because it's not extremist. And there's so many more of us. There's so many people that think like me,
Mhm.
but they get silenced and they get censored. And usually it's from the left and it's from the media. So there are a lot of people that think like me. There are a lot of people that are rational and want to have a logical, open debate. So there's many more like me, and hopefully we can continue having open dialogue and discussions.
No, absolutely. That's extremely important. And that's part of the reason why I like to invite you onto this podcast. Like, hey, we need people from all sorts of different backgrounds, perspectives on life, and just have open dialogue like we did here today. So, Josh, thank you so much. This has been an incredible episode of the JD Show podcast, virtual, of course. Where can the audience find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Josh Seiter Official, where I post to just try to encourage discussions. I use it as a platform to just get people to think. I want to provoke people to think. And they can also follow me on TikTok at Josh Seiter Official and on Twitter at Josh Seiter.
Awesome. Well, Josh Sider, thank you again, and we'll see you next time, man. Ciao.
Bye.